Hello, I'm Kurt, and it's Crocktober again, y'all. For this year's Crocktober, we are making stew, bison stew. But I just want to say first and foremost that this entire recipe is basically just a beef stew recipe. So you can follow this recipe exactly using beef chuck instead of bison chuck, which is what I'm using today. I am only going to be using a couple of optional steps to adapt this recipe to bison, and I'll let you know what those optional steps are along the way. But everything that we're going to talk about today is just as applicable to beef if you want to use this recipe to make a beef stew. Why am I using bison instead of beef, might you ask? Well, simple answer, because bison's awesome. And last year we made a bison chili recipe. Check that out if you want to see some more bison recipes. The first step in your bison/beef stew process is to identify and obtain the vegetables that you are going to use in your stew. Now, there's a dozen different combinations, and you can use whichever combination of vegetables you want to in your stew. But today, this recipe, I am going to be using diced tomatoes, green peas, garlic, onions, mushrooms, potatoes, celery, and onions. We're going to prep these all into bite-sized chunks, and we're going to put them into the crock pot first. Peel your carrots. You want nice, small, bite-sized chunks. These are going to shrink as they cook, but bite-sized chunks into... You're going to want to know you got a carrot in your mouth. I like going a little smaller on the celery. I go light on onions. I'm probably only going to use a quarter of this. Diced. I go really small on the onion chunks too. I don't want to know I have an onion in my mouth. Any kind of mushrooms you like, make sure you wash your produce. Cutting these into like thirds here. Use any kind of potatoes you want. I personally love these mini gold potatoes. Cutting these into like quarters here. 2 cloves of garlic. And mince up your garlic. You're not going to want to know you got a clove of garlic in your mouth. Can of peas, drained. This is controversial because not everybody likes peas. Can of diced tomatoes is where we're going to start adding our liquids. Now for the good stuff. We're going to take our bison or our beef and we are going to cut this up into bite-sized chunks and we're going to set it aside because we're going to brown this. Don't put it in your crock pot yet. We're going to brown this before it goes into the Crocktober crock pot. Our bison is all diced up and prepared. And before we brown it, we're going to season it, just like it's steak. Salt, pepper, garlic powder, a little bit at a time and stir it in. Now before we proceed, let's talk browning and let's talk tallow. Browning. Next step in the process, we are going to brown our meat. A lot of recipes will say that browning your meat is optional. I really don't think it's optional. Yes, technically, if you're really just looking for convenience and you don't have time to brown your meat, you don't have to, but it really does make a huge difference in adding that cooked meat, bison, beef flavor to your stew, which in my opinion is the really unique flavor of stew that makes it so good. The next thing is tallow. I am going to be using beef tallow today. A, because beef trimmings were on sale at the grocery store yesterday, and B, because this is going to be a really good way to supplement the bison meat that I'm using today. Bison chuck is naturally very lean as opposed to beef chuck. And so basically all we're doing by using tallow is we're taking some of that fat from the beef chuck or from beef, and we are adding it to this bison chuck to get some of the cooking effects that you get from using a fatty piece of beef. Now, meet me over at the stove. Here we are at the stove, and I have my station set up so that I have my bowl of bison right here. And all we're gonna do is we're just gonna get it on the pan, sear it, get a good crust on all edges of the meat. It's gonna come out of the pan and straight into our crock pot. Not overcrowding our pan, which is preheating to a medium-high heat, and will be lubricated with our tallow. That's what you're looking for. You're just looking for brown edges on your meat. For this last batch, I'm gonna take the pieces out one by one and try to keep as much of that fat, as much of that tallow in the pan as possible. You're gonna have some flour ready. Basically, we're gonna start making a gravy with the fond that is in the pan. Basically, we're gonna take this flour, put it in the pan, add a little bit more tallow if we need to fully incorporate the flour. We're gonna cook the flour, add a little bit of broth, and yeah, basically make a gravy, put that into the crock pot, and then our stew is ready to cook all day long. Cook it for a minute or two, not super long. We're done at the stove. I will see you over at the counter. All right, we're just about ready to start cooking in our crock pot. We have everything, all of our primary ingredients ready to go here. We're just gonna add a couple more seasonings here. A bay leaf, some thyme, salt, and pepper. Evenly distribute that over your meat. And I like to do this before I put the liquid in. As always, check out the link in the description for the exact measurements. Worcestershire sauce, probably like 2 tablespoons. And then your beef broth. You're gonna want at least 4 cups, but use your senses. Get this mostly submerged. I'm gonna stir this up a little bit because some of the gravy is kind of sitting on top here. We are now ready to cover and cook in our crock pot for 8 to 10 hours on low or 4 to 6 hours on high. If you are using bison, I highly, highly, highly recommend using the low setting, because the lower and slower you cook the bison, the more tender and moist it's going to come out in the end. Because remember, bison is leaner than beef. If you want to know how to bake bread to complement a delicious recipe like this, check out my episode on that, and I'll see you in 8 to 10 hours. All right, we're gonna do a quick check-in here, and here's how our bison stew is looking. About halfway through our cook. Yeah, you just want to stir occasionally throughout, not too often. You want to keep it covered as much as possible. 8 to 10 hours have gone by, and this is what our stew looks like. So I kept on stirring throughout the cook today. I added a little bit of salt. I taste tested and I decided it needed a little bit of extra salt, so I added some salt. And I didn't need to do this today, but like with our chili recipe that we did some time ago, if it's running too thin, if it's running too watery, you can always pop the top off for some time during the cook, like the last hour of the cook. Just real quick, here's a close-up look of our chunky components of our stew. And this is what our bison stew, whoops, oh my goodness, I almost dumped that all over the counter. This is what our bison stew looks like at the end of the cook. All right, so we got our bread, we got our stew. I'm gonna try a little bit of the bison first. The bison just like falls apart in your mouth. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for tender, you're looking for juicy and moist. Chuck is traditionally a pretty tough piece of meat. Cooking it low and slow in this stew like this, that is what the outcome is that you want, is you want it to just fall apart in your mouth like that. You get some bread. That's the best part right there. That's it for us tonight. Thank you. Please come again.